Hello everyone, my name is Arun Prakash. Today we will discuss about shutter speed in this video. This is one of the three most important settings in photography, that is shutter speed. The other two being aperture and ISO. Shutter speed is responsible for two particular things: changing the brightness of your photo and creating dramatic effects by either freezing action or blurring motion. Shutter speed exists because of camera shutter, which is a curtain in front of the camera sensor that stays closed until the camera fires. When the camera fires, the shutter opens and fully exposes the camera sensor to the light that has passed through your lens. After the sensor is done collecting the light, the shutter closes immediately, stopping the light from hitting the sensor. The button that fires the camera is also called shutter or the shutter button because it triggers the shutter to open and close. Shutter speed is the length of time the camera shutter is open, exposing light into the camera sensor. Essentially, it's how long your camera spends taking a photo. This has a few important effects on how your image will appear. When you use a long shutter exposure, you end up exposing your sensor for a significant period of time. The first big effect of it is motion blur. If your subject speed is long, moving subject in your photo will appear blurred along the direction of the motion. This effect is used quite often in advertisements of car and motorbikes, where the sense of speed and motion is communicated to the viewer by intentionally blurring the moving wheels. Slow shutter speed are also used to photograph the Milky Way and other objects at night or in dim environment with a tripod. Landscape photographers may intentionally use long shutter speed to create a sense of motion on rivers and waterfalls while keeping everything else completely sharp. On the other hand, shutter speed can be also used to do just opposite. Freeze the motion. If you use an especially fast shutter speed, you can eliminate motion even from fast moving objects like birds in flight or cars driving past. If you use a fast shutter speed while taking pictures of water, each droplet will hang in the air completely sharp, which might not even be visible to our own eyes. Now we will see how shutter speed is measured. Shutter speeds are typically measured in fractions of seconds when they are under a second. For example, 1/4 means a quarter of a second, while 1 by 250 means 1/150th of second means 4 milliseconds. Most modern DSLRs and mirrorless camera can handle shutter speed of 4000 of a second at the fastest, while some can handle over quicker speed, that is 1 by 8000 of the second and faster. On the other hand, the longest available shutter speed on most DSLR or mirrorless camera is typically 30 seconds. You can also use a longer shutter speed by using external remote triggers if necessary. There are also relations of shutter speed and exposure. The other important effect of shutter speed is on exposure, which relates to the brightness of an image. If you use a long shutter speed, your camera sensor gather a lot of light and the resulting photo will be quite brighter. By using a quick shutter speed, your camera sensor is only exposed to a small fraction of light, resulting in a darker photo. However, shutter speed is not the only variable that affects the brightness of an image. There are also aperture and ISO along with the actual brightness of the scene in front of you. So you have some flexibility when you are deciding on a shutter speed, but you need to pick your other settings carefully. Shutter speed can be a vital tool to capture a photo of proper brightness on a sunny day. You may need to use a faster shutter speed so that your photo isn't overexposed, or if it is dark out, a long shutter speed may be necessary to avoid a photo that is too dark, which in turn could require a tripod due to motion blur from hand holding the camera. For many people, this is the main reason to adjust shutter speed, to make sure your photos are the proper brightness. Still, motion blur concerns are also very important and should not be overlooked. The fast shutter speed is typically whatever it takes to freeze action. If you are photographing a bird, that may be 1:1000 second or faster. However, for general photography or slower moving objects, this you might be able to take pictures as 1/200 second or 1/100 second, or even longer without introducing motion blur. Long shutter speeds are typically over 1 second, at which point you will need to use a tripod to get sharp images. You would also use long shutter speed for certain types of low light night photography or to capture movement intentionally. If anything in your scene is moving when you use long shutter speed, it will appear very blurry. In between, shutter speeds from 1/100 second is 1 second are still considered relatively slow. You may not be able to handle them without introducing camera shake from your hands, especially close to the 1 second mark. Most camera handle shutter speed automatically by default when the camera is set to auto mode. The shutter speed is selected by the camera without your input, and so are aperture and ISO like in auto mode. However, you can still set the shutter speed manually if necessary by setting the camera to shutter priority mode. You choose the shutter priority shutter speed and camera automatically selects the aperture. By setting camera to manual mode, you choose both shutter speed and aperture manually. With both of these modes, you can choose to set ISO manually or automatically. On cameras, we have a top panel. That shutter speed is typically located on the top left corner, where we can find that. If your camera does not have a top LCD like some entry-level DSLR, they do not usually have that. You can look through the viewfinder, where you will see the shutter speed on the bottom left side. And if your camera has neither a top LCD nor a viewfinder like many mirrorless camera, you can see your shutter speed simply by looking on the back screen. On most cameras, the shutter speed will not show up directly as a fraction of a second. It will typically be a regular number. When the shutter speed is longer than or equal to 1 second, you will see something like 1 or 5 with the quotation sign to indicate a full second. If you still cannot find the shutter speed, set your camera to aperture priority mode and make sure that you have turned auto ISO off. Then start pointing around your camera from dark to bright areas. The number that changes will be your shutter speed. I hope you understood the shutter speed now. Thank you very much.